behind the Biltmore Beach Resort over in Treasure Island. You know where that is? Out there on the beach. This week, they will have their annual international sand sculpting competition. They call it the Sanding Ovations. And it's become quite the thing. I mean, it's international. I was there last year, and someone from the Netherlands won first place. And these are not little sand castles. You know, these are structures that are 8, 9, 10 foot tall. They're real sculptures. They're pieces of art. The one that won the prize last year was a rendition of the Greek mythological god Pan. It was incredible. And so you got an opportunity to go this year as well. But you know, when I was there and I was looking at this, you know, the thing is that what you see is really just the tip of the iceberg. All of the work comes before the actual sculpting of the sand. You know what they call it? They call it the pound up. Out there, they even have a song when they begin the festival. They have what's called the pound up song. Because it takes a couple of days to get the sand ready. You have these wooden frames. You have there's like multiple tiers. It looks like a giant wedding cake. You have the first wooden tier, this frame, and what they do is they fill it up with sand and all kinds of water, and then they pound on it, either by hand or with a machine, until the sand is like rock solid. And then they put another frame on top of that, smaller, and they fill it up with sand and with lots of water, and they pound it until it's like concrete. And then another one, again smaller, until they're 8, 9, even 10 foot tall. And then finally, once that is done, like I said, it takes a couple of days for them to do this. It's a lot of hard work. Then they begin the fun part of the sculpting. They begin with the top first. They take the top little frame off first, and then they start sculpting. And then they take the second part off until they work their way down, until you finally have this beautiful work of art. And because these things, they spend so much time making the sand so strong, it lasts. Like I said, it's not like some little sand castle. If you don't get there this weekend, you can go this next 6 weeks. It'll last until the new year. And what hasn't crumbled by then they will finally probably destroy the rest and level out the sand on the beach. These things last for sandcastles for a long time. But then they don't last. You know, when Jesus was looking at the temple in Jerusalem, this was not some sandcastle. This thing took years, decades to build. It was meant to last. As we hear in the gospel, Jesus is saying to the people around him, you see this temple? One day it won't be there anymore. There won't even be a stone on top of another stone on it. There will be nothing left. This was incredible to hear. You know, this was actually the second temple. The first one was built by Solomon himself, King Solomon. And it was said that it was so grand and so resplendent that it was like heaven on earth. It was supposed to last for all time, but it didn't. The Babylonians came and destroyed it, and the Jews were scattered. But after the Babylonian exile, the Jews came back and they rebuilt the temple. It wasn't quite as grand or as resplendent until King Herod came. And King Herod wanted a great renovation and expansion on this second temple. Josephus tells us in his writings, who was a contemporary of Jesus of that time, as historian, we get a lot of what it was like of that day because of him. And Josephus said that when King Herod had this temple expanded and renovated, he had columns that were built, like these columns here, but they were 40 feet high, built from solid marble stone. Of all of the many ornaments that were made, one of them, the vine, which was symbolic of God's relationship with Israel, of which Jesus used himself in his teachings. I am the vine, you are the branches. Josephus said that it was made of gold, and just the clusters of the vine were over 6 feet tall, solid gold. There were large plates of gold that were placed on the edifice, so that when the sun bore down on it, Josephus said that you couldn't even look at it. It was like looking at the sun itself. And at other times of the day, from a distance, when you looked at the temple, it was like looking at a snow-capped mountain because of all the white marble. This was the grandest and the most resplendent of all. Even though it was the second temple, scholars sometimes refer to it as the third temple because of all that King Herod had did. It was supposed to last. But it lasted the least of the two. It was the least lived of all because the Romans came and destroyed it completely in 70 AD. And it was never rebuilt from that time on. As a matter of fact, the Dome of the Rock, which is the Muslim shrine there in Jerusalem, is where the temple once stood. My friends, this was the grand structure that was to last forever, but it didn't. It brings, in my mind anyway, the question, is there anything in this world, in the universe, that will last, that will endure, that will abide? Well, our Christian faith concedes that nothing that we see will last. But the gospel message reminds us that what is unseen will last. The temple, this great edifice, what we could see did not last. But the unseen God of which that temple symbolizes lasts forever. Our bodies will eventually perish, but the spirit that dwells within will last forever. Those things that are visible will vanish, but the invisible will endure. The great temple, which engendered much faith of the Jews and the early Christians alike, vanished. It didn't last. But the faith in which it engendered continues. Why? Because the faith does not live in some house made of human hands, but lives in the hearts of believers. I suppose maybe something that would be similar to what we could relate to would be what happened on 9/11. You know, the Twin Towers, the World Trade Center. If I remember correctly, those two towers were 110 stories high. Over 50,000 people worked in those buildings. It was so big that they had to have their own zip code. That's how big and how much this edifice was supposed to last and endure. And yet in one day, it was gone. I remember reading something from Max Lucado. He's a well-known author, religious leader. He was in New York City a few days after 9/11. He was in a cab on that day, and he was talking to the taxi driver. And he asked him what had changed for him since the attack. And the taxi driver said, "I keep getting lost." And so when Max Lucado asked him to explain, the taxi driver said, "Those twin towers were like my bearings. Whenever I was riding and driving through these streets, I always looked at the towers to get my bearings, to know where I was at, so that I wouldn't be lost. Now they're gone, and I keep getting lost." Things that are visible vanish. It's that which is invisible that will last forever. You know, just a few verses later from our gospel this morning, we don't hear it, but after Jesus says all of this, he says to the people, "Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away." The visible will vanish, but the Spirit of God will endure. My friends, may the Lord always be our bearing and our guide, our marking post in our lives. To put our faith in that, because why? Because Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. Let Jesus be our lasting bearing in our life.